Welcome to the American Regularis podcast. This is episode number 26, and I am your host, J.D. Walter. Follow me on Twitter at reg_American1 and email me at americanregularispodcast@gmail.com. Get a hold of me, like and subscribe, listen to the podcast, tell all your friends, and then listen to it again. All right? I'm a day behind for reasons that I'll explain later on this podcast coming out. And even potentially, if I don't get my editing done tonight, maybe like a day and a half, right? Maybe I have to get it out in the morning. Last week, I mentioned a bit of a reprieve, a bit of a slow news week, and I talked about how that was a nice change of pace. It was not long-lasting. We are back at it with all sorts of information, most of it in the form this week of the election. Lots going on there. Initially, while I was planning the episode for this week, I had a few different ideas, and I think right now, I'm not going to make any promises to you on this, you'll just figure it out if it happens or not. I'm going to be gone next week, and so my plan was have a podcast this week and I'll be off a week. And the amount of stuff that's happened this week, I think I might try to squeeze in a podcast tomorrow or so over stuff I was already planning on covering, and then just trying to release it on time next week. It's not a guarantee. That's what I hope to do. That way I'm staying consistent. You guys have more to listen to. And so some of the stuff I was planning for this week's going to be on the back burner. That stuff, if I do a podcast tomorrow, it'll be about unrealized capital gains tax proposals from Kamala Harris, supporting Biden's ideas on those. That might not sound sexy, but once we get into it and you find out just how disastrous that is, I think that'll be very interesting. And maybe we can find some more stuff to, maybe some more entertaining, lighthearted stuff. Instead, for this episode, though, we are going to focus on two things. I thought for sure the big news for the podcast this week would be the DNC. I don't think it is. We're going to start with it because it wasn't not newsworthy, but I originally was going to have it at the end, kind of as the last act or the headline or whatever you want to call it. It's getting bumped up. It's featuring now, right? It's opening. And the DNC, man, did I waste a lot of my time this week watching the DNC. Now, I had it, I guess I'd call it DVR'd or whatever, so I would fast forward through lesser-known people. I would fast forward through all the musical acts. I had no time for that, but if I saw a face pop up on the screen that I thought, well, this will be interesting, or if not interesting, at least maybe noteworthy, more than interesting, I would listen to him. And each night, I think I watched some every night, and woof, I hope you guys didn't do it. I'm going to give it a brief rundown, because there were parts to take away and laugh at, and there were some differing things, but there really was not much substance. They had a huge list of big heavy hitters in terms of the left. They do better on celebrities than the Republicans, and they had Obama. Sorry, their foreign policy gets me confused. They had Barack Obama speak. They had Hillary Clinton speak. They had Bill Clinton speak. They had, obviously, Vice President Tim Walz. They even had Kamala was even able to talk at the end on the last night. AOC talked. Bernie Sanders talked. A lot of big names. Pelosi. And then there were other people that were smaller, and some of them were very interesting. Earlier I was going to play a clip of one gal who was talking about how unbelievable it would be if Trump got into power, that he might weaponize the judicial system against his political opponents. You've probably seen that on Twitter. It was intensely self-unaware of the Democratic Party. Earlier today, I also saw Jon Stewart with a clip where basically it was Bernie talking about the corruption of billionaires, and then the DNC follows him up with a billionaire. And then they talked about, what else was it? They do 2 or 3 different lines on this. At one point, they bring up sexual allegations against Donald Trump. And then they, Jon Stewart hilariously, and rightfully so, shows Bill Clinton, just to show another hypocritical thing as he speaks. Of course, Bill Clinton, accused multiple times of rape, definitely took advantage of a 23-year-old intern, or however old she was. I mean, she was very young. She might have been younger, Monica Lewinsky. Philanderer, cheated on Hillary, which, I mean, I just... If there was ever a time to give a guy an ounce of slack on infidelity, maybe that's it. But for those of you that don't know Bill Clinton, he's a former president and a close friend and confidant of serial child sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. So, he's known kind of in some different circles, either as an American citizen or as scum of the earth. He kind of runs in both of those circles, like to where you might have heard his name. And his speech wasn't very good. None of these speeches that I'm talking about, Bernie's, I'll get to Bernie's in a second. I did enjoy Bernie's. Bill Clinton's speech was boring. Man, it was old. He was very charismatic when he was young, allegedly. I don't really remember him so much. I was a kid when he was president. But he was supposed to have this charm. His speech was boring. Hillary's was nails on a chalkboard. Who else did I say? AOC's, a lot of histrionics to it, kind of annoying. Bernie Sanders came out and threw heat at not only the Republicans, but the Democrats, with billionaires just buying and paying for politicians. I appreciated that. Bernie and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but Bernie's, to his credit, he's always been at least good about, I guess, the oligarchy's role in just the corruption between government and the billionaires and the mega wealthy and corporations. I don't think his prescriptions are necessarily right, but it was nice that he had the stones to come out and say that, especially 4 years prior, he kind of kowtowed to the DNC after they screwed him and just plotted against him. So it was nice of him to get up there and throw a little heat. I appreciated that part. Kamala's speech, I'll be honest, I had worn myself out so much on the DNC, I fell asleep in like 10 minutes. I can't honestly tell you much about Kamala's speech. She said good evening a whole hell of a lot at the very beginning. They had these little chants throughout the Michelle Obama, she spoke too. She was yelling, do something. Oprah spoke. She talked about how hard she's had it and how she was a victim of income inequality. A poor little old billionaire. She's been a billionaire for a quarter of a century or more. It takes a lot of gall. You were talking about being self-unaware earlier with the lady and the weaponizing the judicial system. For Oprah to go up there and play the victim was pretty wild. They even put up, what's his name? The old CIA director, Leon Panetta, to just talk about how great Obama did during the war on terror and Biden helping him out. And which, again, self-unaware. They're talking about being like the foreign policy wonks or something as they're driving us to World War III. In short, the DNC convention, the Democratic National Convention or Nomination Convention, whatever it's even called. Wow. It was very boring due to lack of substance. and not very informing. I think one of the highlights, or one of the things that was most anticipated, was Tim Walz speaking, because he was kind of the flavor of the week. And these VP picks, they fall off and get less interesting fairly quickly. But they just announced it, and so people were excited to hear him talk. And to his credit, he's a better speaker than Kamala, certainly. I think he was a better speaker than Bill and Hillary. Like, he didn't speak bad. Obviously, Barack's a pretty good speaker. I'm not, like, he's not as good as him. Though I don't really remember anything that was too significantly memorable to Barack's speech. He just knows how to talk. Tim Walz is, he has, I think they want him to be portrayed, and everyone says this, but they're like, oh, he's Coach Dad or whatever. That is how he does kind of come off. He seems, the veneer of him seems much more relatable than Kamala. Like, her laugh and like her cadence is, it's derivative of Barack's, which is unique and politician sounding, but it's his. So Kamala comes off as so inauthentic. This guy sounds more like he is who he is until you listen to the words, and you know his policies and how terrible he was on the riots and how terrible he was on COVID. And really, his pedigree, which they brag on, the thing they bragged on most about him was that he was a high school football coach. And it kind of makes sense because he had a ton of controversial and stupid policies implemented when he was governor. I think his best thing, because so many people don't focus on policies, what people actually did, what they accomplished, what they stood for, but they do go off personalities and stuff. I think the Coach Dad thing might influence some people that are just like surface level voters. I don't know what that name would be. Like, they're not like well-informed voters, which has to be the general amount. Then again, we say VP picks usually don't mean a whole hell of a lot. What I thought he did best at was he kind of speaks like a conservative without ever saying anything conservative. Like, he'll get mad, like, we mind our own damn business, which sounds good to probably like your average independent or Republican. They're like, yeah, mind your own damn business. And the Republicans don't mind their own damn business in so many regards. But it's for a guy that was shooting paintballs and pepper spray at people on their porches during the riots, or for a guy who had such strict lockdowns. I'm going to look real quick. I took a screenshot of some of the stuff he was implementing. Tell me if these sound like minding your own damn business. Governor Walz announces new restrictions on businesses and gatherings in Minnesota. Social gatherings with other households. In-person dining. Adult and youth sports. Fitness gyms. Other activities that bring people together. Bowling alleys, bingo halls, theaters, receptions, private parties, other celebrations, outdoor events, and entertainment. Why don't you mind your own damn business? Right? Canceling birthday parties and bowling alleys. Like, we remember this. There's the hypocrisy of politicians is just always outstanding. I mean, it always is something kind of to behold. Like, wow, I can't believe they said that. But to hear the COVID lockdowners play the mind your own damn business, and we're the ones that believe in freedom and getting out of your way on healthcare, it is almost hard to believe that they can even get themselves to say it. I mean, I know these guys are pathological liars, but for these people that were so totalitarian to act like they're the ones that are trying to mind their own damn business, it was really, really gross. The only other thing I thought is with the crowd, and there was plenty of funny stuff with the crowd and weird people, but it just seemed like they were LARPing. The crowd at the DNC, they chanted cheered when Joe Biden spoke, like before he spoke, for so long. After they basically wanted him forced out, and the other politicians that were there did force Biden out so they could have a chance of beating Trump, they acted like, I don't know, like it was like Caesar returning from Gaul or something. Like, and not maybe that's not the best, because that ended up leading to civil war. But okay, like some sort of Roman general coming back from a triumph. They cheered and cheered and cheered, and he had to like beg him to be quiet. And, it just reminds me, it seems like the far left, the progressives, believe in the progression of, like, in this upward progression of history. Like, we're always going onward and upward, and then, someday we're going to have this perfect world. It's like kind of like that Marxist view of history. And I'm not even talking about communism right now. I'm talking about his historical belief that they'd someday have, like, achieve this damn near utopian ideal. And it seems very important for progressives to be looked upon favorably in posterity. Like, they so badly, like, have this desire, and this is a pretty big generalization, but maybe this is like how I kind of view their group psychology or mentality, and it's speculative. I have no degrees on this, but it seems like they're so concerned with how history will look back on them. They're so pissed that they weren't able to be in the civil rights movement. That's why so many of them lie about being down there. And, they pretended. I saw so many people at my job. Saw so many people on the news and in the city talking, like, pretending that COVID was the Spanish flu or the Black Plague, and that they were survivors of the pandemic. Where they should only have said that if they had, 4 comorbidities and they were 80 years old or something like that. The amount of delusion that they kind of had to participate in to believe that they were just in this crazy moment in time. And it was a crazy moment in time, but it was because of their reactions and false beliefs about the actual disease that created the crazy moment, not the disease itself. They do it with Trump too. Sure, Trump's a jerk. He's not a great candidate. But who do they always compare him to? Hitler. They're surviving the Black Plague. They're fighting Hitler. And, they're in this historic moment where this Cincinnatus, we know as Joe Biden, right, walks out of the city and puts it in the hands of, the new Cincinnatus, which is Kamala Harris, who is just, this brings joy, as they said 30 times. It's weird. So those are my views on the DNC, the mentality of the Democrats, and just kind of the underwhelming. Man, I watched a lot of that for this episode, and I was like, what the hell am I going to talk about? That's the best I came up with for that. There was no huge event, so I hope that part interested you. But let's talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., because this is news. Earlier this week, there started to be reports that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. might be endorsing Trump. Today, that turned out to be true. This afternoon, in Arizona, RFK Jr. gives a speech, a suspension of his campaign. They never end it. They always say suspension. He's going to remain on there, and he says you can vote for him if you like in states where it doesn't matter, but he's endorsing Trump, particularly in the swing states, because there are too many, I think in his words, there's just too many existential topics, existential divisions between him, beliefs, existential beliefs that he deferred from too greatly with the Democrats. And the whole speech was, I think overall, it was great. RFK Jr. is, I know his voice has its issues for medical reasons. He is by far the best speaker that has ran for president this year. Kamala's not a great speaker. She can give a she can read off a teleprompter fine and do the right things there. And Trump rattles off the cuff and says some stuff every once in a while that's hilarious. But for like a man that sounds, and I don't mean it as a pejorative when I say it this time, but stately. It sounds like he's got a bit of a philosopher's mind and he has some oratory and skills and rhetoric. RFK Jr. is the only one. I think he's a very impressive speaker, and some of that's because he thinks better too. And I thought his speech was good. I don't agree on everything with RFK Jr. I don't agree on, unless your name's Ron Paul, I don't really agree with you on everything. But RFK Jr., he is very good on some stuff, and everything he spoke about at length during this, I very much was in line with him. Our execution on what needs to be done might differ, but he said that he had been talking with Trump, and he had 3 things that he wanted to basically talk about. And why don't I play that part for you now? And you hear it for yourself, and tell me if this isn't a man that's somewhat eloquent, and I think being much more honest. Like, Trump will beat around the bush, or he'll say something in a vague way, and Joe Biden or Kamala will just, she doesn't even have anything on, she doesn't have a platform on her website. She doesn't want to answer questions. She's there for the one-liners, and she wants to pay lip service to democracy. Like, you ask RFK Jr. a question, and Bobby's going to tell you what he thinks, like it or not. And it's refreshing compared to the others. Let's hear what he had to say. He says much more than this, but I think this is a good little summary Bobby gives you here. This is him talking about, I think he got a phone call from Donald Trump, like the day of Trump getting shot in the ear is what I believe it is. And this is kind of what they talked about and what he felt he could work with Trump on.
And those subjects have been my primary focus for the last 20 years. I was delighted when Kelly told me that day that he had also been advising President Trump. He told me President Trump was anxious to talk to me about chronic disease and other subjects, and to explore avenues of cooperation. He asked if I would take a call from the president. President Trump telephoned me a few minutes later, and I met with him the following day. A few weeks later, I met again with President Trump and his family members and closest advisors in Florida. In a series of long, intense discussions, I was surprised to discover that we are aligned on many key issues. In those meetings, he suggested that we join forces as a unity party. We talked about Abraham Lincoln's team of rivals. That arrangement would allow us to disagree publicly and privately, and fiercely if need be, on issues over which we differ, while working together on the existential issues upon which we are in concordance. I was a ferocious critic of many of the policies during his first administration, and there are still issues and approaches upon which we continue to have very serious differences. We are aligned with each other on other key issues, like ending the forever wars, ending the childhood disease epidemics, securing the border, protecting freedom of speech, unraveling the corporate capture of our regulatory agencies, getting the U.S. intelligence agencies out of the business of propagandizing and censoring and surveilling Americans and interfering with our elections. Following my first discussion with President Trump.
Okay, I think that was pretty good. And he goes on in detail and talks very intelligently about the 3 main issues that he talked about during this speech were the war in Ukraine, the health of the nation, especially pertaining to like children, and the third was like censorship and undemocratic processes of the Democrats and the left. But listen to how he said that. He mentions that he was a fierce critic of Donald Trump, and I think CNN, and they've already thrown up like these clips where he was scathing remarks during 2016, and probably rightfully so in many cases. And then he says maybe one of the only times you can have like a pull away something great for Abraham Lincoln, but he's like, we talked about his, what do you call it, team of rivals, and how they'd butt heads and they could argue publicly, privately, and fiercely. Like, think how honest this is compared to, well, for instance, when Kamala dropped out of the race without winning a single delegate in 2020. When she was picked for vice president, I believe it was Stephen Colbert or Jimmy Kimmel, one of those two schmucks. They asked her, like, you said some pretty harsh things about Joe Biden just a month or two ago, let alone, Bobby Kennedy's referencing stuff maybe 4, 6, 8 years ago. And he says, I still have problems with him. I still said, if I'm doing this, I'm going to be arguing with you. I'll butt heads with you in public if I don't believe in it. I'm not going to kowtow to your beliefs. Kamala was just a couple months before in a debate saying that she was riding on separate buses or had to go to a separate school because of Joe Biden and his racist policies. Like, that's some heavy-hitting stuff. And they ask her about it. She's like, it was a debate. I'll never say anything bad about him again. It was a debate. Like, it was so, she couldn't be honest about it. I like that RFK is saying, no, there's very key things that I can agree with him on. Enough that Bobby's willing to support Trump against Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And not as a VP, but in some sort of cabinet position, I assume. I think he would be best in health. If you go listen to this speech. The way he talks about ultra-processed food and soil regeneration and seed oils, like I'm right there on it. Like right now, I'm basically doing the carnivore diet. I do have a small allotment of carbs, maybe 25 grams, and it does get. I usually tally most of those up to beer, but I'm right there on board. I thought he was spot on that stuff, and I think that would be a great spot for him where it wouldn't be controversial to put him there with a Republican constituency under Trump being president. I thought it was well said that he wasn't just going to be a bootlicker, and that he was there and he thought that he could, accomplish his beliefs under Trump. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe Trump's taking him for a ride. Maybe Trump's going to get the support he wants from RFK Jr.'s voters, gives him some spot, and then never listens to him, doesn't pick up his calls. I don't know. That seems very, very likely. It's not something I couldn't not see happen. But maybe it's something different. Now, CNN covered this. Obviously, this is pretty noteworthy, and a lot of people on the left are going to be concerned that it tilts the election and the polls in Trump's favor. And by the way, they hate Trump for sure. They also hate RFK Jr. And CNN, it is the context that they leave out and the substance that they leave out. They try so hard to find a spot where Bobby Kennedy's not bringing up these valid points of contention with the left or these valid, terribly important issues and problems that America has. And they find that one part to talk about, and then just listen. This is a little bit longer of a clip. I'm going to stop several times, but it is amazing how poorly they actually cover this. Like, when you say it's covering news, you're supposed to, cover news. Imagine watching, football highlights on ESPN, and instead of showing the touchdowns and the interceptions and the big sacks, imagine if ESPN just showed, chopped up highlights of people approaching the line of scrimmage or the quarterback calling an audible, and then never seen any of the action or the scoring or the big plays. That's almost what it was. If you watch that whole speech and then compare it to this coverage, it's on par with ESPN not showing scoring drives. It's just, here it is.
The causes were free speech, a war in Ukraine, and the war on our children. I've already described some of my personal experiences and struggles with the government's censorship industrial complex. I want to say a word about the Ukraine war. The military industrial complex has provided us with a familiar comic book justification like they do on every
monitoring
war.
this from RFK
That
Jr.,
this
but
one is a noble effort to
that
stop a
was
supervillain,
so
Vladimir Putin.
They said military-industrial complex. Cut him off. Start talking. Oh, we're not ready to go. We're not ready yet. We can't cut off that early.
I'm invading the Ukraine and then to thwart his Hitler-like march across Europe. In fact, tiny Ukraine is a proxy in a geopolitical struggle.
Doug High with us, as well as Johanna Maska. She's the host of the Press Advance podcast. She's a former Obama White House director of press.
As soon as he starts going in to the X's and O's of the Ukraine war, they're like, all right, cut cameras. It's like remember when the general starts pulling all the cables out on Forrest Gump when he's speaking at the reflecting pool? They're like, get this guy off the stage. Shut him up. All right, let's keep listening. This is just the worst. This is a how to be lame corporate media.
Advance. He's talking about wanting, and we've seen a press filing or a court filing in Pennsylvania. Yeah. So he's saying that he's taking himself off of these ballot access challenges in states where he would be a spoiler, right? These battleground states, like, tell me if I've got this right, Doug. But when it comes to a red state or a blue state, you can sort of, if you want to vote for him, you can then register how you feel about him. And then in the crazy possible chance of a 269 tie between Trump and Harris, then maybe he can just ride that all the way to the White House?
Yeah, I was watching that, and Donald Trump last week stood and said in front of a bunch of groceries and said, I haven't seen any Cheerios in a long time. I had Cheerios for breakfast. This was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And trying to get any logic out of that is good luck with that.
Okay, so it's like, oh, the guy's crazy. Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. It's a lame joke. No one appreciates it. And it makes no sense. It makes sense. He's saying, I'm not going to take away key electoral votes from Trump. I still want as many votes in the popular vote as I can get. And in the rare case, and RFK says it as such, he's like, it's still conceivable in the rare case that neither gets 270, that, you know, there could be some sort of filibustering or willing-dilling or whatever to where he could become president. That's not his plan, but he's saying, I'm not ending my presidential race for that reason. I'm just suspending it. But for all practical, pragmatic, feasible purposes, he's supporting Trump. It's that simple. That's all that means. And these guys are acting like they just can't understand the math on what he's doing. He's a confused guy. He doesn't understand it. There's no explanation for that other than the simple one I just gave you. It's a red herring. All right. And now you're going to listen to him make fun of RFK's voice.
Because it's, one, you can't understand what he says. Two, if you can't understand what he says. And I'm reminded of a line in Mel Brooks' Blazing Saddles when somebody gets up and gives an indecipherable speech. He says, who can argue with that? That's authentic frontier gibberish, and that's exactly what that is.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, to your point, though, Brianna, the big overarching issue here for both campaigns, for the Harris campaign and the Trump campaign, is the third-party sort of X factor and what that means for turnout in November. So even if what he was saying wasn't easy to follow, it is still the concern of either campaign, which is partially why Trump is looking for that endorsement, that these voters are sort of the X factor in what they decide to do with RFK Jr. going into November when it's going to be such a tight race. And we've seen that before back in 2016.
And yet his supporters may be confused because we're even confused based on his own statements. Now we've gotten a fresh statement from his campaign clarifying previous remarks in which initially in this court fighting in Pennsylvania, it said that he would be endorsing Donald Trump. His campaign came out and said, that's not what's happening. Then he, in his remarks, said that he was throwing his support behind Trump over the war in Ukraine, what he described as the war on our children, and chronic disease was another one. It's hard to make sense of. Johanna Maska.
Okay, it's not hard to make sense of. First off, they're like, oh, it's so hard to understand. It's hard to understand when you don't show any of the clips of him talking. And when he starts to bring up the war in Ukraine and the military-industrial complex, you cut him off. Furthermore, the part where about chronic disease, he gave fact after fact. If you can't understand that we're an unhealthy nation and that big pharma and the medical industry is happy about the money that they make from it, and insurance is happy about, like, if you can't understand that, then you should get a different job. It's so disingenuous what they're saying there.
What he described as the war on our children, and chronic disease was another one. It's hard to make sense of. Johanna Maska, what do you see in all of this as this rambling speech goes on and he launches attacks against Democrats?
Well, and look, he's reminding us who he is. I mean, he's the troubled son of a famous politician who has had drug problems, problems with women, nefarious business dealings with Venezuela. I mean, there were a lot of questions about his intentions in this campaign from the get-go. He is not ready for prime time and certainly not ready for the presidency. I mean, he's never held elected office, but he got some momentum because a lot of Americans didn't want Trump and they didn't want Biden. And I think we have to be careful as Democrats not to demonize the views of his supporters. There are a lot of people who are skeptical of modern medicine right now. We don't need to demonize them. We need to seek to understand. We need to go after those followers.
Okay. So she says nothing of substance. She just immediately attacks him. He's he's had drug problems. Bobby Kennedy has been sober for 40 years. Okay? So guess what? That's water under the bridge. I'm sorry. He was a kid. His dad got murdered in the most public way possible after his uncle got murdered in the only more public way possible. Not a great story. Kid gets hooked on drugs at 15 years old. And then before he's 30, I think. I looked it up. He's been clean since like 1984. So that's whatever. The woman allegations. Yeah, I think he's got one about a babysitter said he was whatever. He goes, I don't remember it. He apologized. Joe Biden has allegations against him. Donald Trump has allegations against him. Barack Obama's allegations are from a man. I guess it was consensual. I don't know that he has any allegations against him. Bill Clinton, 1 or 2 allegations against him, right? And then I looked high and low. I couldn't find any nefarious business dealings in Venezuela. I couldn't find them. I could find Burisma in Ukraine. I could find that. I couldn't find the Venezuela stuff she was talking about. And we go back to the drugs. Was it Biden that had coke in his White House? I'm sure he's not the only one, but he's the only one that I know of that's gotten caught. And now she's saying, hey, but we can't just judge. We can't just judge, his fans, the medical skepticism. They're kind of trying to tread lightly because I think they are worried about where these votes are going. Let's listen on because this next part just really, what did the English say, chuffed my bits or something like that?
I don't know if there's people in, Pennsylvania who are following exactly what he's saying, but I think, he's reminded us who he is. So now it's time for the Democrats to really go after his supporters who have questions about Trump too.
Okay, Joanna, seek to understand people who believe that kids should not get childhood vaccines that keep them safe. I mean, I understand there's a lot of debate, and you can say what you will of the COVID vaccine, but
I'm sorry. So, Bobby Kennedy never talks once about vaccines in the whole speech, and he is anti-vax. And he speaks pretty intelligently on it. I don't know enough. But did this, I can't even say what I want to call her, did this lady on CNN just say whatever you will about the COVID vaccine? Let's hear that again.
And you can say whatever you will of the COVID vaccine.
Oh, you can say of it what you will on the COVID vaccine. Really? Is that right? They're not taking down YouTube videos left and right anymore? People aren't losing their jobs? You're not being called a science denier. You're not being told that you're hurting killing grandma. You're not being called a plague rat. Really, you can say whatever you will about the COVID regime, or the COVID vaccine. Say what you will about it. Well, that's a convenient switching policy for CNN there. I'll be damned. That's good to know that we can do that now. The nerve. Absolutely incredible. This whole thing, we're not going to watch any more of that. It goes on for another 4 minutes, and all it is cheap attack after cheap attack without ever going against substance. They never once address anything he says. And if they say it, they quickly mock it and turn it around and throw another ad hominem at him. It was disgusting. Say what you will about the COVID vaccine. Thank you for your permission. You snarky. All right. That's unbelievable. All right. So, this transpires. They're worried about it. And conversely, the Trump people, the MAGA country, right? These terrible people, they're excited about it, right? It helps them, their odds, whether they like RFK Jr. or not. Some of them probably do. So much of MAGA is anti-COVID regime, anti-vaccine, for COVID vaccine at least. Many of them are that, and Trump's neither of those. So many of Trump's people probably like RFK Jr. just on that. But, I mean, there's a lot of things where Bobby is just a Democrat, and they probably don't like him on that. So they might not care one way or the other, except if it helps Trump, they're happy about it. And RFK Jr. attended a Trump rally just not all that long ago, tonight. And I'm going to play a little clip of it here in a second, kind of just his introduction. He comes out to Foo Fighters, My Hero, which is a pretty interesting song pick. I assume maybe that went over and got the nod by Trump. I can't imagine a guy as cocky as Trump to let anyone else be referred to as a hero while he's on stage. But Bobby comes out, the place goes nuts, and let's listen to what's said early on, because I love this part. This part makes me excited for at least one thing. Well, probably a couple things, like Kamala losing, but one thing that I'd be excited about if Trump were to win the election.
His candidacy has inspired millions and millions of Americans, raised critical issues that have been too long ignored in this country, and brought together people from across the political spectrum in a positive campaign grounded in the American values of his father, Robert Kennedy, a great man, and his uncle, President John F. Kennedy. And I know that they are looking down right now, and they are very, very proud of Bobby. I'm proud of Bobby, you want to know the truth? And I don't think I've ever introduced anyone that got applause like he just got. I must tell you, I don't think it's true. I don't think I've ever introduced anybody that got applause like that. I can't even believe I have to say this. Nearly assassinated in Pennsylvania last month. Bobby called me to express his best wishes. He knows firsthand the risks incurred by leaders who stand up to the corrupt political establishment. When you stand up, you bring on some trouble for yourself, but you have to do what's right. You have to do what's right for the country. I will tell you, we are both in this to do what's right for the country. That's one thing I can tell you. He lost his father and uncle in service to our country, and Bobby himself was subject to repeated threats to his safety during the course of his campaign while being denied protection by the Harris-Biden administration. And this is a tribute in honor of Bobby. I am announcing tonight that upon my election, I will establish a new independent presidential commission on assassination attempts. And they will be tasked with releasing all of the remaining documents pertaining to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And they will also conduct a rigorous review of the attack last month. But I tell you, I have never had more people ask me, please, sir, release the documents on the Kennedy.
Wow. So, not only does he get Bobby on board, but hey, he gets to tie himself in with Jack Kennedy getting shot, who's a hero, widely regarded as a hero, and at least looked on very favorably as a president in the United States. And Trump gets to put his name in there. We have that in common, liked minds with, I've got his nephew here. And here we are, and it's come full circle, and now we're going to go get him. Like, that's a good storyline. That's a good narrative. And look, it was 63 when he was killed, right? Is it 63? We're in 2024 now. Is that not enough time? I mean, that conspiracy theory could be getting Social Security, couldn't it? If not, damn near. So, if Trump honors this deal, I'm going to close out now. I've went longer than usual, but a lot of stuff to talk about. But if Trump does honor his end of the deal with Bobby, and this happens, I think the commission thing will happen. It's got Trump to do with it. But he gives Bobby a good spot, health or whatever. I saw someone say CIA director, whatever. He gives him a cabinet spot, right? And he takes him, and he lets him argue with him, and that is a step in the right direction. I think the Trump campaign, I think the Trump presidency would be better with a mind like Bobby Kennedy in there, even for whatever I disagree with Bobby. I think he could be a very positive influence with Trump on matters of foreign policy. The health crisis, sure. And then censorship, like Bobby Kennedy's great at those things. It also makes me wonder if that doesn't show us that maybe Trump was being truthful when he was at the Libertarian National Convention, saying that he'd put a Libertarian on his cabinet. And now, all of a sudden, this duopoly, and it's still a duopoly, I'm not saying it's the end of it, and I'm not saying there's anything, but all of a sudden we get this, we might be seeing the beginnings of this weird type of U.S. political coalitioning, right? We don't have all these like smaller parties that have to get together. But you got these two big fish, and then if one of the fish is so egregious, maybe all these little guys that are pulling 0.5% or 1% or 2% say, hey, we'll throw our hat in the ring with this guy because we just think the other one's so bad. All of a sudden we have this weird type of coalitioning, right? That could become, at least maybe in the short term, maybe it lasts a long time, like an integral factor in upcoming elections. Like, that could really change the political landscape. It's likely that it does not, and I think it's also likely that this might be the only time it happens. But I think that would be a little bit of a step in the right direction to give the smaller voices, the libertarians or the Greens or the independents, to give them a little bit of stroke with saying, you have to listen to us because our 0.5% in these small margin victories, all of a sudden our 0.5%'s a pretty big damn deal, and we can take our ball and go home or go to the other side, and all of a sudden that's a pretty good shift. Like, that could be good for American politics. Interesting week. I'm going to go start editing this as soon as I get off. Thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next one.